Invader Zim may have been the most bizarre Nicktoon of all time. In every way, shape, and form, this show was just weird. I know I'm going to have a hard time putting this next part into words, but bear with me because there's a method to my madness. Though this may not have actually been the case, it kind of felt like the higher-ups at Nickelodeon saw the wave of gross-out toys in the 90s and early 2000s, like the Queasy Bake Oven, the Grossinator, and many others, and they were like, okay, so that's what kids like nowadays. And they wanted to capitalize on that exact audience. So their answer, of course, was GAC. Then, when GAC wasn't enough, they doubled down and made the GAC inflator, so now you could blow your GAC up like a bubble. Then, eventually, the higher-ups at Nickelodeon were like, wait, what if we channeled the same chaotic, sensory, gross-out energy into a cartoon? Then, from there, it was just a matter of finding out who would be the one to do it. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the surge in popularity of weird, dark, gross-out toys was the push that made Nickelodeon want to make this kind of show, but whether it was or not, what it came down to was they wanted to create a show that would appeal to the new generation of 11 to 15-year-olds. They wanted to capture that same kind of edgy, gross-out humor that was seen in Ren and Stimpy, but with a twist that would appeal to a new era of kids. This would result in Nickelodeon producers going on the hunt for someone who could match that same chaotic Ren and Stimpy humor in a more modern and edgy way. And oddly enough, they would find exactly that in an underground comic book artist by the name of John Vasquez. In the search for a new show creator, Nickelodeon producer Mary Harrington would come across a comic book called Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. She would find herself impressed by the character design as well as the overall art style, and as a result, she reached out to him to ask if he'd like the opportunity to pitch a series to Nickelodeon. As a 22-year-old artist with absolutely no experience in animation, he made the ballsy choice to enter the Lion's Den, or should I say the Sponge's Pineapple, to pitch them a show idea. He knew from the start that his past work was certainly not appropriate for a children's cartoon, so instead of making an adaptation of an already established work, he decided to make a completely new concept. He originally had an idea to do a light-hearted show featuring a wacky alien who would misunderstand human customs and as a result would learn a lesson by the end of the episode. He's gone on record saying that this probably would have been more successful on Nickelodeon, but it was too far removed from his writing style, so he scrapped the idea. Late one night, he would find himself laying in bed, unable to sleep as a result of hypnophobia, and he would come up with the show idea in less than an hour. The premise would revolve around an alien invader who came from a race so advanced and powerful that he could easily take over or even destroy Earth single-handedly, but instead he chooses to just stay in school all day and adapt a human-esque life. And just like that, the concept for Invader Zim was born. It's a show that, like I said, was just weird in nature. It was so different from anything that Nickelodeon had done up to this point, and it just completely capitalized on that young audience who they thought was craving that gross-out humor with a dark and edgy twist. It's a show that I definitely enjoyed as a kid, despite it contrasting everything else on the network completely in my eyes. However, it would also be one that would find itself frequently having issues with network censorship. Writers of the show have previously stated that the relationship between the show's staff and Nickelodeon executives was kind of dysfunctional, and that, quote, the executive assigned by Nickelodeon to oversee our show, who was and still is a decent guy by the way, probably felt like he had to keep a lid on an inexperienced show creator and as a result clamped down harder than he should have. It was also believed that Nickelodeon executives likely looked to Rugrats as the model for what a cartoon should be, and this show was absolutely none of those things. It was a massive conflict between the show's personality and the network's, and as you'd imagine, that was a massive problem. For example, there would be certain episodes where characters were written to be killed off, but the executives wouldn't allow anyone to die in their shows, so they demanded that the crew add certain details to show that the character actually survived, or just to rewrite the episode completely. As you'd imagine, the show's writers complied with these demands, but they did it in a sarcastic way that seemed intentionally forced in an effort to convey their feelings towards the matter. I will say this much though, After doing more research on the show's creator, he's someone that I can definitely look up to from a creative standpoint. He's gone on record saying that collecting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic books is what switched something over in his head as a kid. There was just something different about those books compared to the superhero comics that were really popular at the time. He said, quote, "The books felt dirtier in my hands. The filthy artwork and hero characters that never seemed healed from their previous battles. There was a sense of person just behind the printed page that I had never felt before. A thinner separation from production to my hands and eyes that just fired hooks out into me." And that right there is a feeling that if you've never felt it, is hard to relate to. It's a feeling that I try my best to convey in my own content in a way. It feels like what he's trying to say is that the words come fresh from the artist's brain, they're printed onto their media, and consumed directly by the viewer without 16 different editors, executives, and corporations giving their 2 cents first. Sure, in my case, I'm held to YouTube standards of being relatively family-friendly, but outside of that consideration, these words you hear are fresh from my brain to your ear without anyone else's consideration along the way, and as an artist, that for me just feels so good. In the case of Invader Zim, however, it would unfortunately lead to Nickelodeon not wanting to continue the series anymore. The show's creator has gone on record saying that one of the biggest changes for him was going from working on a comic alone to working with thousands of people at Nickelodeon. He said that it was an absolute misery, but he's also called the experience of working on Invader Zim incredibly gratifying, but also fiendishly frustrating. Due to declining ratings and a general lack of love from the network, among other things, Invader Zim would get cancelled partway into its 2nd season, leaving 6 episodes unreleased for a couple years until they were put out on DVD and released on Nicktoons network. It's a show that I can say that I've gained a lot of respect for over the years. It was a show that pushed the boundaries of Nickelodeon unlike any other show had before. However, it's also a show that would unfortunately end up shrouded in controversy, and as the dominoes fell, the show would find itself being wrapped up in a murder trial and being cited as the murderer's motivation. That's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna check out an episode of Invader Zim that's hailed as one of the most shocking episodes of all time, Dark Harvest.
My organs! Inferior human organs! Oh, my squeedly spooch!
The camera pans over to these 2 characters sitting nearby. If you're not familiar with this show, this is Dib. He's a young boy who's obsessed with all things paranormal, so much to the point where he gets labeled as crazy and is very unpopular at school as a result. As soon as Zim moved into his neighborhood and started going to his school, Dib saw right through his disguise and knew exactly what he was. At that moment, he vowed to expose Zim to everyone and stop him from destroying Earth. And this is Dib's little sister, Gaz. She's a misanthrope who's known for her violent and antisocial tendencies. She absolutely hates her brother and is seen on multiple occasions being physically and verbally abusive towards him. He isn't all too kind to her either. They have a really interesting and extremely hyperbolized version of your regular brother-sister dynamic.
Squeedly spooch, did you hear that, Gaz? That's no human organ. Humans don't have squeedly spooches.
I've got a squeedly spooch.
If only I had some way of looking inside his body.
Just then, a delivery truck rolls onto the playground, with the driver saying that he has a delivery for Dib. In all too perfect timing, Dib gets a pair of X-ray goggles that he ordered from the back of Crop Circles magazine. He uses them to analyze Zim a little bit further.
Incredible! See, Gaz, to defeat my enemy, I must study my enemy, then become my enemy, then move in with my enemy, then wear my enemy's clothes, then...
You're in my light.
We cut over to the classroom where Miss Bitters is teaching the kids about how the song Ring Around the Rosie is actually about the symptoms of the bubonic plague, when all of a sudden a pigeon flies into the classroom and directly onto Zim's head. Ms. Bitters sends him to the nurse's office saying that he has head pigeons and she doesn't want him spreading it to the rest of the class. As he goes to leave, she stops him, telling him that he can't leave without a hall pass.
If you leave school grounds, it will explode.
You know, Zim, when the nurse examines you, she'll notice that you don't have human organs. Then it's just a short step to a hospital, and from there to an alien autopsy table, and then you're just another segment on Mysterious Mysteries. I'll be fine. I bet my squealy spooch on it.
Zim walks through the halls of the school until he reaches this, 8-way intersection of doors. He looks through to the biology class as he sees the teacher giving a lesson, and he looks down to his own body a few times, noting that his organs are different than a human's. Just then, a hall monitor walks up demanding to see Zim's hall pass.
Say, you're full of organs, aren't you?
Why, yes. Yes, I am.
And you wouldn't notice if you were, say, missing a few?
Probably not.
We see the hall monitor walking away, and we're treated to this haunting zoom into his belly button, where we see the explosive collar embedded into his organs, taking the place of the one that Zim took. Meanwhile, back in class, Dib is sitting at his desk drawing a picture of Zim on the autopsy table when he realizes that he's been gone for a while now. We see Dib break his pencil, and this happens.
Ms. Bitters, I think a pencil is lodged in my brain. Can I go to the nurse?
How far in your brain?
Pretty far.
All right, take the auxiliary hall pass.
We cut right over to the nurse's office where Dib is talking to the girl at the front desk. He asks about the kid with head pigeons, but she has no idea what he's talking about. It's not until he brings up the green kid that she starts to point him in kind of the right direction.
Oh, the green child. He's right over there, doubled over in pain.
The cooing. The cooing.
He's missing his liver. That's how some kids react to the cafeteria food. The lucky ones.
Dib puts on his X-ray goggles to see Zim's explosive hall pass inside of the hall monitor. He connects the dots that Zim is stealing organs and replacing them with stuff as he rushes to stop him, carrying his massive hall pass along the way. We then see Zim creeping around the air duct above the front desk lady's head. He proceeds to lower down a device that he uses to suck out her brain. We then cut over to Dib as he drags the 62-pound hall pass down the hall. He starts to hear a cooing sound from above him, and he continues on, trying not to show any fear. Right when the organ extractor appears above him, the bell rings and he's hit by a door just in the nick of time. All the kids walk past him and he tries to warn them, but none of them will listen.
I don't feel so good.
The whole pass!
Dib continues through the school, which is just covered with kids who are green in the face, having had their organs snatched by Zim. All of them lazily slothing around, most of them with their faces buried in their lunch.
Look at them. And it's not even ketchup and rice day.
Dib sees his sister Gaz, and he approaches her, but she says not to bother her because she's in the zone. He puts on his X-ray goggles to see that she's had one of her organs replaced with her handheld game slave, which she seems to not mind in the slightest. Meanwhile, the other kids are just in pure misery, having had their organs switched out for various items. Dib approaches Zim and tells him that this has to stop. Zim plays dumb until we see him vomit up some intestines and proceed to suck them back down his gullet.
You think you can fool a trained medical professional? Yes. I suppose you've got a heart in there.
6 of them.
Intestines?
Large or small.
Spleen?
In 3 different colors.
What about lungs? You won't find lungs on my watch, Zim!
Dib sees a healthy-looking kid nearby and warns him that he's in danger. The kid seems to not believe Dib and doesn't want to go with him, so Dib insists on following him, considering that he seems to be the last kid that still has all of his organs. Dib explains to him that aliens are more than just a hobby for him and that he has memories of being abducted and taken onto a spaceship. As Dib gets lost in his own talking, he is completely oblivious to Zim abducting the last kid. Dib goes looking for him and stumbles upon this dark room full of organs and jars and other experiments. Dib sprints down the hallway as ceiling tiles keep falling behind him, with Zim clearly being in hot pursuit up there. Dib finds a way to the school's boiler room, and he finally comes face to face with Zim.
That one is head pigeons. The other one is just annoying. Fix it.
As they sit together, Dib tells him that his plan won't work, but Zim assures him that it will because more organs means more human. Just then, the moment of truth comes as the nurse approaches.
There! Why, you're one of the healthiest little children I've ever seen. And such plentiful organs. And what's the matter with you, young man? It isn't human! It's horrible!
But he...
Man, this show is just out there. It's still mind-blowing to me that some of this was shown on a children's network, but with that being said, they got what they were looking for. They wanted a show with that nitty-gritty, dark, edgy feeling, and boy did this show deliver. Now, like I said earlier in the video, this show would end up getting cancelled due to low ratings, lack of love from the network, and other things. It's widely believed that this episode was greatly responsible for the eventual cancellation of this show. The reason behind that would be the murder of Pamela Vitale on October 15th of 2005. On that fateful night, Pamela's next-door neighbor, 16-year-old Scott Dileski, would break into her house. Previously, he was involved in a plot with his best friend to start growing marijuana in his closet. He tasked his best friend with coordinating the lights, while Scott took it upon himself to secure the funds. One thing would lead to another, and he would end up breaking into his neighbor's house. Scott ended up finding her in the home, and he made the decision to bludgeon her to death, then he would proceed to remove multiple organs from her body. Authorities thought that maybe Scott was surprised by her during the burglary, and that would lead to him doing what he did, considering some of his blood was found on the ski mask that he wore. However, his girlfriend testified in court saying that he had talked about beating and breaking the necks of children and was curious about how the human body would function without certain organs. There is conflicting information regarding this out there. Certain sources say that Scott himself came out on the stand and cited the episode, saying that it was his motivation because he became, quote, fascinated with collecting body parts and curious as to how the human body would function without certain organs. However, according to other sources, it wasn't Scott who brought it up, it was actually the prosecution. They brought up the episode citing those things that Scott, the defendant, had said after seeing it, alleging that to be the motivation behind the murder. However, his friends testified saying that those comments were just a joke and that he didn't really mean it. Furthermore, Scott pled not guilty and decided to exercise his right to remain silent, as he literally didn't even testify. I could see him saying that if he was attempting to plead insanity, but that wasn't the case. Regardless of that, the show finding itself in the middle of a literal murder didn't have anything to do with the cancellation of the show. This episode would air in April of 2001, and the show would be canceled in January of 2002, less than a year later. This crime wouldn't be committed for almost 4 years after the show was canceled. I definitely see why people would leap to this conclusion at first glance though. If you Google when was Invader Zim cancelled, the answer that pops up is August 19th, 2006. The trial started in July of 2006, just 1 month before that. If you take that 2006 date at face value, then yeah, it certainly lines up to make it seem like that testimony resulted in the cancellation. However, what really happened was after Nickelodeon aired Season 2, Episode 1 in December of 2002, they just sat on the remaining episodes of Season 2 that were complete. Like I said in the beginning of this video, there were 6 more episodes finished, and instead of airing them, Nickelodeon would just hold on to them until airing them on the Nicktoons network between June and August of 2006, and putting them out on DVD. There was no renewal for more episodes, the show didn't come out of cancellation, they just unearthed the previously unseen episodes during that time. But again, at first glance, with a basic Google search and no investigative work, one could certainly come to the conclusion that this trial and episode episode would lead to the show's cancellation. Another thing worth pointing out in regards to the show cancellation is that Richard Horvitz, the voice of Zim, has gone on record saying that the show didn't perform well due to what was going on at Nickelodeon at the time as far as the content they were putting out, and how their show just wasn't appealing to that same audience. And on top of that, it was airing in a world fresh off the heels of 9/11, and the last thing that anyone wanted to watch was a character who was hell-bent on conquering the Earth. Now, from start to finish, this was a dark episode. The whole premise of Zim taking kids' organs is obviously just messed up. But on top of that, one massive thing that I feel like often goes overlooked in regards to this episode is the fact that the teacher had this collar in her desk. Her hall pass is straight up a beeping collar that blows up if you leave the premises. That's messed up for obvious reasons, but if you peel back the layers a bit, it kind of ties into what Richard Horvitz was saying about the show airing in a post-9/11 world. This same world that was fresh after 9/11 was still healing from the Columbine shooting that had occurred just 2 years before in 1999. If you aren't familiar with what happened there, you can do your own research, but the point is that it was originally meant to be an attack with explosives that actually failed, and due to that failure, the assailants settled with shooting. It goes without saying that, much like world domination in a freshly post-9/11 world, depicting that in a school in a world still healing from the Columbine shooting likely didn't do Nickelodeon's image any favors. I will say this much though, I definitely don't think they could have gotten away with that in 2023 with how different the world is now than it was 20 years ago. Now, with all of that being said, I think it's definitely important that you and I take some time to look at some more lighthearted aspects of this episode. First of all, this is all kind of Dib's fault. He's the one who basically told Zim that he's gonna be screwed when the nurse checks him out and finds all of his organs out of place. Like, why would the nurse even check out his organs for head pigeons in the first place? Like we saw, it was just as simple as her walking up and shooing the pigeon away. If Dib hadn't said that, odds are Zim probably would have just gone to the nurse, gotten the pigeon shooed away, and came back to class like normal. The irony of him stealing so many organs and stuffing his body with them, then the nurse deeming him healthy because he has so many organs, just sent me. Even as a kid, this had me busting up laughing. More than anything though, this whole episode is a great example of how easily fooled Zim is. He didn't even stop to think that the nurse wouldn't pay his organs any mind. Honestly, if he wanted to, he could have just used his organ extricator to remove her brain and give himself a clear diagnosis, then went back to class. Instead though, he jumped through all these hoops and took organs from literally everyone in school. Much like how he could easily complete his mission and destroy the Earth, but instead he jumps through all these hoops of living a life amongst the humans. Another really cool thing that I didn't get as a kid, but I noticed as an adult, is during that scene in the beginning, we see that person in the science lab moving a jar with a pink bunny in it. This pink bunny is none other than Filler Bunny, another character created by Jonan Vasquez. Filler Bunny was created to fill up the blank space and trade paperback copies of his other comic book Squee, due to the fact that the trade copy had missing spots where the advertisements were in the original run of the comics. Usually, Filler Bunny is seen being tortured by unseen forces for the viewer's amusement, and in this case, we see him get set on the windowsill, then violently hit with a dodgeball that breaks the glass jar that he's in. This reference is one that honestly sparks so much joy for me now that I know what it means and I actually get it. One last and final thing that I have to point out is how stressful school is in this show. Like, just in case the morbid lesson plans, ketchup and rice for lunch, and the fear of having your organs stolen wasn't enough for you, they have this hallway right here that leads to an intersection with just an overwhelming amount of doors. I don't know what it is about this, but man, just looking at this gives me anxiety inside, and I hate it. It reminds me of being a freshman in high school and wandering the school campus for the first time just completely lost. But what do you think? Do you remember this episode? Did you enjoy Invader Zim as a kid? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. Huge shout out to my patrons, especially those of you in the true 90s kids tier. You guys are the absolute best. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and give praise to the YouTube algorithm in hopes that it pushes this video to everybody else. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.